All right. Again, I just want to tell everybody the name of the program is Standards-Based Career and Technical Education Curriculum Guide, and it is aligned to chapters 4 and 339. And then I'm going to go. I only have now. It didn't work. All right. The program, I just in the form of a background, a little bit of a background. Excuse me. This is an overview. And time doesn't permit a total understanding because it is an overview. I have 25 slides and 60 minutes, so it's going to be roughly 2 minutes a slide. But just on the basis of a little bit of background, approximately 2 years ago, PDE and PACTA conducted a survey of all the current technical schools and school districts with comprehensive CTE programs. And they wanted to find out who had a curriculum model. And at the time, we had about half the schools said they do have a curriculum model. With further follow-up that said they do have a curriculum model, we realized it wasn't a curriculum model, it was individual lab purchased a curriculum. It was kind of a hodgepodge. It wasn't a standard template. And many of them were not in compliance with the chapter 4 and 339, the checklist and the criteria. So seeing that, it was determined that we really need to take a look at a standard model. Now, the presentation is intended, again, to provide an overview. It will not provide in-depth knowledge. It's going to give you a good background. And then when we conduct training and train the trainer later, it'll make more sense to everybody. My experience tells me it takes about 2 to 4 days of in-service to prepare CTE teachers for full implementation. A lot of times an overview like this is done at an in-service day or a faculty meeting, and then they get into the specifics on how to train people how to do this. The following links provide all the specifications or specific requirements that provide a framework for developing and implementing a standard curriculum model. What people don't understand, if you read chapter 4, 4.31, and the vocational technical ed part of the chapter 4 requirements, which you know is the standards curriculum, and then chapter 339, which deals with the specifics for CTE, they do provide very specific criteria. And then, in fact, PDE has their own checklist, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but they have their own checklist, what they look for when they come around. If you looked at all of those and put it into a template, that's what we try to do with this curriculum model. So the regulations provide the critical resources that educators, teachers, and administrators need for the detail. The Department of Ed and the regulations of state school code tell you what must be included in a CTE program, but they do not tell you how to put it together. And nor are they trying to do this with the model here. The model is an example of what meets the standard. That doesn't mean people can't develop their own model, but it gives them a checklist to go against to make sure that they, in fact, do meet the criteria that's specified in the regs. We'll also find this on APE reviews that it's really all over the place when we look at schools as to what they're doing. Okay, the program PD again does provide a detailed checklist for their APE review. So people would look at that APE review and look at the checklist. It asks some specific questions that people say yes or no to. And we find a lot of schools are preparing for the APE by putting all their notes together and putting the criteria together, not using it as a framework to develop a program. They're more looking at it as a compliance regulation. If you use it as a framework for developing programs and for developing curriculum and instruction, you automatically will meet all the criteria in the checklist. But again, I see people that are approaching this the wrong way. So once again, everything educators need to develop a standard-based CTE curriculum model is, our curriculum framework is online at PD's website. And if you look at the regulations, standards-based is required by Chapter 4 and 339 regulation. So that's the term we're using. So the standards-based curriculum guide will help educators prepare curriculum as to what we teach. It can facilitate student-centered instruction. And that's instruction is how we deliver the curriculum. And a lot of schools are doing teacher-centered, as it's not nearly as efficient. It is not required. You can be competency-based or standards-based without being student-centered. But if you really want a more efficient model, you'd look at how to deliver it in a student-centered format. So the standard-based curriculum model, or the guide, does provide the model as to how to do this, how to prepare curriculum and deliver the standards-based student-centered model. It does prepare it. There are 10 steps to develop the curriculum process. So I'm going to go through those steps, and the notes are in there, and you will have a copy of the PowerPoint. It's going to be available on the slide, and it's been updated recently. So again, there are 10 steps. Let me go through those 10 steps now. Step 1 is to determine the program offered based on the classification of instructional program, the zip code. And there's a link there that provides a zip code. And again, that's program approval. Everything you need is on there. We use, in Pennsylvania, we use the federal zip code process. So the purpose of zip code is to facilitate the organization, the collection of data and reporting, and the study of program completions. Step 2 is to complete an occupational analysis. Now, PD does provide a program study, which is an occupational analysis. If in fact you don't have an occupation analysis, you can get an occupation analysis from many, many other sources. You can get it from other schools. You can do a DACOM. You can do a incumbent worker survey. I know Ohio has programs. ONET has some information. There's just the consortium of states has it. There are many, many occupation analysis. You don't really have to develop your own. And PD has the majority of those prepared, and they're continuing to do more. I just wanted to point that out. All right, step 3, follow the steps of the PD program approval. Here again, the link gives you the program approval process. Step 4 is prepare a course description. The course description is a brief overview of the courses that describes probably the philosophy, the goals, objectives, and it also should highlight the duty areas as well as post-secondary employment opportunities. Some people like to focus on future trends as well. So I'm not trying to read everything to you, but I want to make sure that in this overview, we have all the details you would need to follow the directions to develop this model. Step 5 is to adopt the program of study secondary competency list, if available. Again, PD has the majority of these available, but task lists are also available that are not necessarily a complete program of study. But the task list is a core component of every program of study, and I believe everybody understands that. Additional tasks can be added by the Occupational Advisory Committee, but in no circumstance can the Occupational Advisory Committee eliminate tasks. They can recommend, remember, they're guidance only, they're not governance, they're advisory. So when a program of study is not available with PDE, a local developed task list can be recommended by the OAC. And again, it must be validated, it must be recorded, and so on. That's part of the approval process. But in general, PDE has the program of study for most popular programs. If you have an odd program or unique program that's not fully developed yet, you can get a task list for anything online. And you can begin and then localize it with your OAC. Step 6 is to determine the career objective. And this is based upon SOC codes through the ONET. And there again is ONET link. Now the SOC code is a standard occupational classification in the United States. It's used for classifying occupations, collecting data, comparing occupations, etc. The program SIP, or classification of instructional program, is entered into the education section of the web page. After that code is entered, the corresponding SIP code will appear. You can use the following SIP crosswalk hyperlink as your guide to developing the career objective. I'm going to talk briefly a little bit about that because, again, what we see is not what should be done according to regulations. Next is to develop a crosswalk using the career objectives, the titles, job titles, and the SOC codes. So if you have a task grid, you can do the crosswalk. So in one, generally across the top, you have the occupational titles, and then along the left margin or vertically, you're going to list all the tasks. Then you put an X or a check mark in those that apply to the specific occupation. This is not spelled out in advance for many cases. A lot of times it's a matter of taking it to your advisory committee and have them validate it. Most teachers fill it out themselves and then have it validated or have it edited by their advisory committee. So the task grid, that crosswalks the performance tasks and the SOC codes. That's it. That's the task grid. It identifies a specific task to be mastered for a specific job title. The task grid also shows the common or core tasks in a specific program. Common tasks tend to be those that are required by multiple occupations, and core tasks are those that are required by all occupations. So if in fact you're in culinary arts or some other program and you look at the check marks and you see every job title has a check on those, generally in the beginning, you'll find that, okay, they're core competencies. Everybody has to be able to do those before they start to individualize. Just common sense. Step 8, complete in cooperation with the students an annual educational and occupational objective for students enrolled in the secondary program. Now, here's the link for the career objective form. And I know a lot of times I would have interaction here and I realize everybody's muted. So I want to tell you what I'd find. Now, the career objective form, when I visit schools, and I visit a lot of schools in this state and a lot of school districts, and done reports, done assessments, and what have you, and every time you ask about the career objective form, oh yeah, we do that, it's on file in the guidance office. You ask what it's used for, well, it's a requirement where it's ready for the APE review or the APE on-site compliance review. The whole intent of the career objective is for the student to identify an educational goal and occupational goal, post-secondary goal, what have you. And in fact, that should drive the competencies that they're going to take each year at the Career Center or in their CTE program at a school district. A copy at least should be on file with the teacher, and the student should understand what their career objective is, their educational objective, their occupational objective. So again, we do it because it's required, but it's more than required. It's required for a reason. It's to help to guide the student's progress toward their learning, focusing on the program of study. So what do you do with the student's career objective form? Probably already answered that. It's on file in the guidance office. Yeah, that's a good idea, but it's more important that it's on file with the teacher and the student has a copy. They understand it. That's what it's all about. Excuse me. Step 9 is the process. It's develop a learning guide for each task or competency on the program of study task list. The learning guide is a student-centered, teacher-developed plan of instruction designed to move the student through a series of scripted learning activities necessary to attain proficiency or competence on a performance task. The learning guide is designed to promote self-directed learning of the student or student-centered instruction. The design of the learning guide allows the students to complete learning activities and competencies based upon performance standards at their own pace. The learning guide provides the basis for individualized instruction. It benefits all students and it's essential to support students with disabilities because, again, you're allowing people to get the support they need and work at their own pace. We deal with competence and standards, not necessarily Likert scales or not necessarily grading on a bell curve. It's difficult to do that with the competency. You must meet the industry standard, period. So I will spend a little more time on the step 9, but let me cover what components of a learning guide. In a learning guide, you have several components, one page. You have a heading, which is mostly for filing. You have a task, which comes right off the program of study. You have a purpose, like tell the student, why are you learning this? And you can make a brief sentence about why it's important to the student. Then you have a performance objective. Now, sometimes schools like to use the word exit outcome, terminal performance objective, etc. But the reality is it's just the performance objective for that competency or that task. Then we look at supporting objectives, and supporting objectives are those things you need to do to teach a program. Whenever you ask a teacher, well, tell me how you teach this course. Well, the first thing I do is a reading assignment. I have them learn about the technical knowledge. I had them read the chapter on baking, or have them read the chapter on anatomy and physiology, or read a chapter on the cooling system, the automotive, what have you. That is the technical knowledge. That's the theory part. Then I also, if they have to cut lumber and they have to do some measurements or calculations, and we're doing roof trusses, maybe they're doing Pythagorean theorem. So I have to teach that as well. So we have a supporting objective for the academics that are required to teach this specific competence. We don't make stuff up here. We don't add stuff that's irrelevant. It's only those that are essential to teach this competence. For example, if we wanted a student to cut lumber to a specific angle and a specific length, and we have to use Pythagorean theorem, it's a lot easier to show their knowledge on a piece of paper in a quiz than it is to let them go out and start experimenting by cutting lumber. So we write a supporting objective for that. A new one that's been added, and it's really dominant in Perkins 5, is the employability skills. Now, we have always had employability skills in CTE, and it's grown from just a few to many. I know some schools that have well over 100 employability schools. Virginia Beach got a huge amount of money, the school district in Virginia Beach, and they developed this, and it was all over the country. Enormous employability skills. We used to call it, learn job keeping, job seeking, 21st century skills, etc. Under the new Perkins 5, there's an employability skills wheel. There's 9 areas, I believe, about 21 to 23 specific competencies. You only include those when they're applicable. If they're doing something that doesn't require a specific employability skill, you don't include that as a supporting objective. It's only when it's important. If they have to do a math calculation or something there, it's automatically in. If they have to do some kind of financial understanding or paycheck, if it's interviewing, job retention, those kinds of things, then you include it. You don't automatically include an employability skill. The last supporting objective is guided practice. This is when you want them to practice the outcome, and maybe they're using a checklist, maybe they're using a specification or a recipe or something, and they may or may not use that when they're doing their final exit or performance outcome, the final assessment. So the supporting objectives really move the student from theory to academic standards to possibly some employability skills, and practice it until you're ready to test out. Along with that, we have required resources. Like, what do you need to be able to do this task? And what are the safety factors? Obviously, we always teach safety as a separate unit. We also integrate it in every competency. Here's where you would integrate it. Say, remember, protective personal clothing or equipment must be worn to perform this task. So here's where you use your safety factors. The next are the learning activities or learning assessments. So learning activities could be read chapter 4. The assessment might be answer the quiz at the end of the chapter or complete the workbook, or provide written answers to the teacher-made task or whatever. It's those activities that you want them to do step by step. And did they learn? What's the point in reading a chapter if you don't know if they've learned the material? What's the point of them explaining Pythagorean theorem if they can't demonstrate it on a piece of paper that they can understand and can do the calculations before they cut lumber? And the final part of this is the performance assessment. So what I said earlier, some of these are just informational. I spent a lot of time on this. Now we're going to go through the learning guide. But there's one final step, and that's step 10. Remember, there are 10 steps. And a final step is important to the student. It's important to the graduate. It's important to employers by tracking the completion of competencies or tasks. Students can often take that with them when they go for a job or when they go transition into post-secondary. Many colleges will accept competencies and transition based upon those competencies and provide advanced standing or some type of articulation. Now for the learning guide. So all of this so far, that's the complete 10 steps. But step 9 is the learning guide, how to develop. And this is the unique requirement of this specific curriculum model. So I'm going to throw this, and I've taken the headings out so it doesn't interfere. And honestly, this would be one continuous learning guide. When you look at this, it's only 2 or 3 pages long, but I can't put it on a slide that way. So I'm telling you, the title really is, the learning guide template or directions, step 9. At the top, you'd probably put the school name there, hometown CTC or what have you. And then filing information, you put the zip code as an option. You don't have to use the zip code. Not important to the student to know their zip code, even though some people ask them in an on-site. It's totally irrelevant. The area, course name, health occupations or what have you, culinary arts, you put that down there. The task number taken right from the program of study. The date written is when the learning guide was written by the teacher. Instructional hours is an estimate by the teacher how long it's going to take to teach it and how long the student to master it. For example, if it takes you 2 hours to teach this specific knowledge and competency, and it takes the student another 2 hours to master it or to demonstrate it, you would allocate 4 hours there. This helps you in your planning. You know that you have instructional time and student mastery time when you allocate time for your program of study. The next step is the task. The task is a short statement taken right from the task list. You don't have to know anything. You just take it right from the task list. Remove and replace just brake lining or whatever, prepare a pastry or whatever the task happens to be, take blood pressure. And this is what it's all about. The purpose statement, again, just a brief statement. Tell me why you need to know this. Why is it important? This is all probably on a quarter of the first page. Again, it's difficult to put it on a slide here. Then we go down to the next part of this. And it's the performance objective, which is where it all comes together. The performance objective includes the 3 elements: the performance or task right from the task list, the condition under which it will be performed in your lab or on the job, and the standard or criteria that you're going to evaluate it by. So we always use industry standards. And in some particular cases, it's 100% accuracy. That doesn't mean the theory has to be 100% accuracy. You may have a standard of 80%, but you may have the student write out the correct answers for the questions that they get wrong. But when they're performing the specific competency, the performance objective, if they're replacing brake lining or taking blood pressure, or whatever that criteria has to be, there is only one standard, and that's 100% accuracy. So the performance, again, includes those 3 components: a description of the task, tell me exactly what has to be done, take it from the task list, conditions under which the student performed the task, using a reference or denied a reference. For example, if they're putting brakes on a Toyota, they may have to look up the Toyota specifications. Nobody can remember all this stuff. If they're performing a specific criteria using a recipe, you may give them the recipe. If they're performing a specific competency like taking blood pressure or temperature, say, well, you're not going to pull out a procedure sheet for that. You have to internalize that. So you would deny the use of references to perform that exit outcome. Again, this is up to the teacher. The standard is how well it must be accomplished, the degree of accuracy or proficiency. The program of study identifies proficiency level as the industry standard. That's where your OAC comes in. They must validate the task list and the performance standards. Do not be subjective with the criteria. You can't put brakes on to a B or an A minus. You can't do certain things with a recipe and substitute for sugar for salt because they're both white. It doesn't work that way. So again, I may be oversimplifying this, but performance criteria is critical. Now for the performance supporting objectives. Again, I said, and I covered this before, if you're going to move someone from zero knowledge to mastery of a specific competency, they have to do certain things. And this is the interim performances you want them to do to prepare for the final outcome. And in general, we could have no fewer than 3 supporting objectives. Knowledge, which is tell me what I have to learn here. I need to read a chapter on pastry or what happens, whatever you're talking about, or framing or whatever it happens to be. And then the academic concept or standard is, convert fractions to decimals or whatever you have to do here to get that right. And the last one is guided practice. With some specific competencies, you may have a communication skill. So, well, I'm going to plug that in because they really have to talk to the customer. And that's an employability skill. So I'm going to plug that in. It is not required for every task. It's only required when the teacher believes one of the core from the Perkins employability skills wheel requires it. You can add your own if you want, but it's gone out of control with how many people put in there. So take a look at the Perkins requirement. So again, the knowledge objective is tell me what I have to do. What do I have to do afterwards? Well, read the chapter, then complete the assignment on a worksheet, do a small presentation, do a project, Tell me what I have to do. Do I do a quiz? What do you do? This does not change how the teacher teaches, just capturing it so the student knows what's next. And the same way with the academic standard. The academic standard is, tell me again what I have to do. If I have to understand a specific academic component, it is a science component that I have to understand, transfer of heat or what have you, or hydraulic principle. Tell me what that academic standard is. It should be grade appropriate. The program of study, so let me make sure I'm together here with my notes so I don't too far. Okay, the program of study crosswalk, use it to identify essential PA core academic standards. You have academics crosswalks for every course. They're available at PDE. You know what's required. You don't have to do a third grade math problem if it's already been mastered years ago. The standards you use should be grade appropriate, something between 9 and 12, something that they could see again on the Keystone exams. And it's important that students understand the relevance of it. The student should understand, again, the importance and how it applies to performance objective. You can't cut lumber until you can demonstrate this. You can't determine the size of the wire until you can do code, until you can calculate Ohm's law, what have you. These are the things that students have to understand why they're doing. It brings relevance to the rigor. And again, the PA academic standards, the link is here for you. The crosswalks, the link is there for that as well. And again, the employability skills, I'm telling you, it is not required. It's only required if, in fact, you believe it's required. Where do I find the framework? The PCRN Perkins Resource Network Consortium Research provides the link for those employability. It's a one-page document. It's outstanding. If you haven't used it already. Okay. Guided practice now. Let me just make sure I do this right. All right, the guided practice. Sorry, on my own notes. When we talk about guided practice, this is when you want the students to practice, prepare for it. You know, if you want someone to run a marathon, they're not going to be able to go do that the first day. So they have to build up to it. Sometimes they have to practice a specific task or competency until they meet the skill level that they're ready to be tested out. So you determine how that's done. It can be done on a mock-up. It can be done on watching videos. It can be done on a live work project. You have to have a rubric and a checklist and determine whether it's a procedure, process, or a product that they're actually developing, or a combination of both. You know, so some tasks are very procedure-oriented, others are product-oriented when it comes to the assessment. But I would argue that every product that's developed in a class by a student still has to have a specific procedure sheet or criteria that they follow to get to that point. So it becomes process/product. The guided practice provides a student the opportunity to receive feedback prior to the final assessment. It's non-threatening environment. Go practice. Johnny, you did a good job. You performed 8 out of the 10 steps correctly, but these 2 you need a little more practice on. Take a look at it. Tell me, look it up and write the correct answer to these 2 procedures, or tell me what you would do differently the next time. Get that feedback, non-threatening, supportive environment, positive reinforcement. That's the guided practice. Now, another thing we require in the learning guide is tell me what resources I need. Before I begin, I can look at that and say, okay, I need textbooks, workbook, I need software, or maybe I need a video, I have to watch a video. You know, I recorded all my lessons during the pandemic. Maybe I want to use those in the classroom for the students that aren't here, or they can watch them at home because they missed the theory, what have you. Recording your lessons gives them an opportunity to make up that session. Recording your demonstrations does the same thing. So a student may watch a recording of a demonstration before they go out and practice. In some subject areas, it's desirable here to list essential tools and materials. So depending on what they're doing, you may not want to list a specific tool that they're going to use. Maybe not. Safety factors, again, reinforce those practices, accident prevention, precautions, essential clothing, equipment, etc. We never, ever want to miss that opportunity to reinforce the safety criteria for a lot of reasons. That should be obvious. The learning activities. The learning activities detail instructional and learning assignments required for the student to master the core knowledge essential to academics, relevant employability skills, and the performance objective to meet standards. What do you mean by learning activities? These are the step-by-step things you want them to do. Step 1, read chapter 4. Step 2, complete the quiz at the end. Step 3, complete the academic quiz on converting fractions to decimals or what have you. It's all those things that you want them to understand. It's almost like a recipe to complete the task. It's a step-by-step procedure. Guided practice is the same way. They get a criteria sheet and they perform that criteria with following a sheet. At some point, you may take the criteria sheet away from them and say, all right, I'm going to use that for evaluation. Go ahead and perform the task. Here again, if you want to deny the resources or the references, that's how they would perform it. If they have to look up the resources or the reference, if they have to look up the recipe, if they have to look up the criteria for your automobile or whatever it is, Ford's different than a Toyota, etc. So if in fact that's the case, then they must locate those references and then they show you that they have the reference and they complete the quiz or they complete the task as per the instructions in the manufacturer's manual or the blueprint sheet or the criteria sheet or the recipe or the procedure sheet, whatever you use in your classroom. This is where the teacher takes control again. This is the part that most people have questions on. I'm sorry, but we can't do those questions, but we'll do them a little later. Each supporting objective requires a minimum of one corresponding learning activity. So if I have a supporting objective for theory, I said before, you're going to tell me to read a chapter, or you're going to watch a video, or you're going to go online and watch whatever. All these things are what you want them to do to make sure they understand and can apply the theoretic to the project. We're not just training them here, we're educating them. So the education part, the theory understanding part, is critical to their development. Learning activities inform the student of the assignments to be completed in order to attain proficiency on the supporting objective. Students are assessed on learning activities or assignments. It may be very simple. This is formative assessment. We're assessing each criteria that you want. If you have a supporting objective, it should be assessed. Why would you have them read a chapter or do a math problem if you didn't check their answers or didn't check their knowledge? So you're sampling their understanding. These are teacher assessments. You can grade these the way you would grade any subject, but the final outcome must be different. The final outcome is yes or no, satisfactory, unsatisfactory, pass, fail, met standard, needs practice, whatever. We'll talk about that shortly. So again, the theory, the academic standards, the employability skills, and maybe even the guided practice all can be somewhat subjective in your final criteria. You can give a grade for that activity if you so necessary. That depends on your rubric and how you would assess the student. Now, points to consider when preparing learning activities. 1, provide necessary background information to perform the test. These are just instructions to the teacher. They're right on the learning guide template. 1, information in the learning guide. Information, job, procedure sheets, drawing sheets, information. All these things that you already use as a teacher, you should be able to include right in the learning activity packet or learning guide. Audio-visual reference. If you have a film strip you want them to watch or a recording of some type or an online reference, hopefully at some point you'll have all your lessons and learning guides online that the students can use it as for makeup. They can use it to work ahead. They can use it for reinforcement. Students with IEPs can use it again with support from a professional, paraprofessional, what have you. All of these things make the teacher more effective and improve student achievement. That's why we're doing this. And we're creating a packet that allows the student to be self-directed learners. It allows them to do things on their own. It does not eliminate the teacher. Some students need a lot of help. Some need minimal. They can work through this on their own and get it. So rather than keeping everybody together, we provide these resources. They can work independently, fast or slow, based upon their pace till they master it. And at some point when they leave, if you remember on step 10, we are recording their number of completed tasks. So those who work much faster and more efficient get a lot more copies completed. They may get more job titles completed on the task grid or the career objective form. Those that have learning disabilities or have challenges in understanding some of this may not complete as many competencies or may not complete as many occupational titles. Maybe their post-secondary objective has to be revisited. Maybe they need some more remediation. These are the things that will help them understand their own capabilities and understand your expectations and the industry standards. Reference to a specific place in a textbook. If you want them to read chapter 4 and it's page 69, tell them, don't photocopy it. You know, we could even be in copyright infringements here, depending if it's fair use clause for your own students and you've already bought it. You don't need a copy repair manual, just reference it. Require research for specifications and or specific procedure. If it's given by someone else in a blueprint or a recipe or a factory specification, let them look it up. That's part of their learning. Rather than going to the boss all the time and say, where does it, where do I get the assignment? What do you want me to do next? They should be able to be self-directed employees too. Refer to a workbook or a homework assignment. If you give them a specific homework assignment, it should be turned in and graded. That's part of your job as a teacher, as an educator. It's not shop, it's not show and tell. That's just a small component of what we do of educators. And obviously, you know, under the federal standards right now, under the Perkins, under Every Student Succeeds Act, Future Ready Index, all of this is important to have students participate in work-based learning activities. Yes, you can do that there. You can send them out in all kinds of work-based, everything from shadowing to internships to paid co-op to apprenticeships, you name it. We do want work-based learning activities to reinforce what they're doing. And it begins very early. If you're getting freshmen need to be involved in work-based learning. Okay, provide learning activities. These are more notes for the teacher. Provide learning activities that reinforce the academic standard or concept. When possible, refer to the state academic standard. And again, they're going to see it again in the Keystone exams. Provide a learning activity on relevant employability skills, only if applicable. Stress the importance of the performance objective, the end of program assessment, not the NIMS. You're going to see this again, and there is no compromise. Prepare for it. It's important. Make it relevant, make it real. The learning guide is developed by the teacher. Understand that this is a teacher-developed instructional piece. It provides a student with the resources necessary to practice, complete the task, and performance objective independently with minimal help from the teacher. Some students need a lot of help, some will need none. At some point, the teacher has to do the final assessment, not an aide. An aide can do it in practice, but not the final assessment. It's not ethical. Optional learning activities. In some cases, you can include optional learning activities, enrichment activities, things you want to reinforce or take a student to another level. If they can work faster, you give them. You can include that here. You can also address accommodations for special needs students right in the learning guide, for their learning guide. You have these online, you have them on your computer. It's easy to do the modifications right there. This goes a long way to helping students that need help. Grading. Now, I'm sorry, the grading learning activities such as test quizzes or knowledge, academic employability skills should be graded using a letter or percentage grade. This is where you can give an A, B, C, you can give a 70, 80%, whatever it is. There are other factors you consider in the marking period grade or the end of the year. Factors such as attendance, attitude, general safety, etc., should be assessed as determined in your school's grading policy and guidelines. Grading the final performance or competency is outlined in the performance evaluation component below. So everything up to the final outcome can be graded very traditionally. The final outcome is not graded traditionally. The performance evaluation and we're doing good here because I'm not getting questions, I apologize. The performance evaluation is considered the summative assessment of the task or performance objective. A performance evaluation is developed by the teacher listing the criteria needed to reach proficiency. If the student completes the performance to the industry standard, the student is considered to have attained proficiency of that task. You need an evaluation checklist or rubric to use to rate the student's performance on a task or performance check. Do not Likert scale those tasks. The student should be able to use the checklist for self-evaluation on the task during the guided practice, prior to teacher evaluating the student. I would use a very simple example here. You know, if we're asked someone to make a pot of coffee and it involves 5 steps, those 5 steps might be plug in the coffee pot, install the filter, install the coffee, put the coffee packet or measure the coffee and put it into the basket, and then add the water to it, turn it on. If that's 5 or 6 steps, or suppose it's 5 steps, and somebody missed 1 step, does that mean it's an 80? You know, if you didn't put the coffee in, we're not going to have coffee. If you didn't turn it on, if you didn't put the water in, if you didn't, any one of those steps eliminates the performance of that task. Again, this seems oversimplification, but I've seen teachers try to give someone an 80 when they never really completed the final project, or they never performed to the standard. If the student missed a critical step, they need to do that step over or do the whole thing over. If the step isn't critical, it probably shouldn't be in there. Maybe it's just a note as a reminder. So again, this, when we evaluate the final performance, it must be done according to the industry standards, period. It is an assessment of the final performance objective. Students can be evaluated on each step of the procedure, and or the product produced by the student can be measured against specific criteria. The most desirable rating scale for each step in procedure is need, practice, or satisfactory versus pass, fail. We try to avoid the words pass, fail because there's a negative connotation here. If a student completes 15 of 16 steps in a procedure and criteria and they miss 1, you know, they did a pretty good job, but they're still not satisfactory. So you can rate every one of those steps as satisfactory or needs practice. It's also easy when they go out on the job site for the employer to do the same thing. If they completed a competency there, but they didn't quote right, let me say, well, you need to do this a couple more times. So you really need more practice. So you versus pass, fail. You know, it's so final, it's so negative. We want to use positive reinforcement, encourage the student. Okay, Johnny, you did a good job here, or Mary, you did this, but you missed an important step. Take a look at this. How would you do it differently? Oh yeah, I missed it. I'm sorry. You know, they're going to right away. Okay, go practice, and when you're ready, let's do it again. That's what it's all about. It's about meeting the satisfactory criteria. The overall rating on the learning guide. Remember, all of these that I have with the red heading, this is all 2 or 3 pages, but I can't put 2 or 3 pages. So the learning guide is a continuum. If you would look at the learning guide, and we have time, I'll probably show 1 or 2 here. It looks like I will have time because, again, I thought I'd have a lot of questions. The overall rating in the task or competence should be needs, practice, or satisfactory or met standard, period. The student must complete all steps satisfactory to be assigned or to be signed off in the performance objective criteria. The following graphic just gives you a template. So where it's blue here, like 1, 2, 3, 5, whatever, that's where you're going to put the steps or the sequence that must be performed in the procedure or to meet, or the criteria that you're using to evaluate it. That's what has to be included there. So each step that's critical has to, yes, you need practice, and it's just a check mark. You know, student has to know what they did right or did wrong, and that can continue. The performance assessment, again, this is the final piece here, and I'm going a lot faster than I thought I would, but that's good because we will have time to talk about this. The performance assessment, all items must be marked satisfactory. Is there any question about that? Please save it for the end, but we need to talk about that for it to be signed off by the teacher. Now, there's a lot of tools a teacher can use here. They can have their own little task list for every kid. They can do it on a computer, on a spreadsheet, and just check out the date when it was done. You don't have to sign it as a teacher for yourself. You simply put a date on your spreadsheet that they completed. The student has their own log of activities or their own log of complete or tasks. Yeah, you might want to initial it and date it. Note, the evaluation criteria must be the critical steps in the procedure sheet or a recipe or a factory specification, etc. The assessment criteria must be clear and objective. That completes the end of the learning guide instructions, a template for that. I have two examples, and I'm probably going to put them up because I do have time. I'm really way ahead of the schedule, and I thought I'd be way behind. Two examples of completed learning guides. So if you just bear with me here, I'm going to try to find those and just put them up to show you that. But let me finish the presentation part. The Department of Education, the Bureau of Career and Technical Education, has looked at the criteria in this, and they said, yes, this does meet all the criteria to meet the standards in or requirements in Chapter 4 and 339. You are free as a school to have your own learning guide, your own template of how you're going to have your performance-based curriculum, but it must be standards-based. And you must have that, at some point, you'll have that approved by PD. They're not ready for that yet. There's a process to get this whole thing approved, and it's in process now. But it's already in the APE checklist. When they come around and look at your program, they're going to look for examples of how you are providing standards-based curriculum and instruction. It is a requirement. Look at Chapter 4, look at Chapter 339, and the links we gave on the first or the second slide after the introduction slide. Right now, the CTDSLs have a copy of this learning guide, curriculum guide, I should say, the template, the format, whatever you want to call it, and they are prepared to help facilitate and train CTE educators on the model. If they're not prepared personally, they all have different strengths, and some specialize in curriculum, others specialize in some other thing. They will make arrangements to have this taken care of. So if you have a CTDSL, they're your first line of resource right now. And at some point, PACTA will be running workshops for administrators and for teachers. The curriculum guide, again, meets all criteria in chapters 4 and 339, but you can provide your own model. However, at some point, it will be checked to make sure that it does meet the criteria in chapter 4 and 339. And that point could be on a 339 on-site compliance and an APE review. The curriculum guide is fully compliant with chapter 4 and 339. I say that again because people are struggling to try to come up with, how do I do this? How do I do that? The regs don't tell you how, they just tell you what. We are providing a template here and a model on how to do this. The only change in this whole criteria is the fact that teachers will be preparing individual learning guides for students. So if I have 110 competencies on my program of study, I would have 110 learning guides. And those learning guides would be updated at any time the OAC requires changes or any time you believe you need modifications. But when they're completely finished and you have the resources aligned to the learning guide, whether it's videos or whatever, recorded lessons or procedure sheets, all those things, when you have it completed, you don't have to make complete packets. You just have to tell the student where they are. So if they have to watch a video or they have to read a chapter, it's all in the instructions of the learning guide. Everything the teacher needs to prepare for this, they already have to do in teaching on a traditional method. And PDE has on their website everything you need when it comes to program study, career objective form, task grids, everything is ready. The exception of a few programs of study may not be available, but task lists are available. And if they're not, other schools can provide it throughout the country. They are available. I say this because this is a weakness that we're seeing out there, that people don't know where to get the resources, or they have a lot of questions. And you don't always have a lot of people who can give you these answers, especially with curriculum, because it's unique. We're not asking teachers to become a curriculist. We're asking you to prepare your instructional materials in a way that it's less teacher-centered and more student-centered, that I, as a student, can follow the directions with little or no help from the teacher. That doesn't mean the teacher is not going to check on my knowledge. It doesn't mean the teacher is not going to teach theory. That doesn't mean the teacher isn't going to reinforce components. You may decide I'm going to teach theory on a system or on a career cluster or a duty area all at once to my students. But think about this. You can have 3 or 4 levels of students in your class at one time. When that happens, they have to have a way that they can work independently. A lot of teachers will say, get to work. Get to work is not an assignment. Students have to have a by name assignment. They have to know what's needed in their own career objective. So if my career objective is to become a chef, and I have 71 learning guides that I have to complete, I should know that they're sequenced and where I get those and where I can go. I may have to ask a few questions of the teacher or the paraprofessional, maybe not. It depends on my own individual background and my self-confidence. But as I go through this and as I complete these as a student, I'll become more and more self-confident, and I know what the teacher wants. I know how to do this. This works. Yesterday, I'm at the polls voting, and I bumped into a teacher who recently retired after 35 years. And he was telling me he had 5 national champions and how well his student does. And he has always had at least a third of his class to over 50% with IEPs. And for 35 years, this is the only model he knew. There are some small nuances, changes in this model, but basically it's the same model that a lot of schools in Pennsylvania are already using. In fact, a lot of the CTDSLs are very, very familiar with this, as I said. Okay. Once again, the session provided an overview, and in many ways, I wish I could have had some reaction, but I was concerned that we have so many questions I wouldn't get through this. It provides an overview of the PDE, Bureau of Current Technical Ed, standards-based curriculum requirements that is in the regulations. This is not approved yet by the Department of Education. However, it's moving in a process to get that done. It has been reviewed and endorsed by the Bureau Director. And yes, this is a requirement because schools must be standards-based. If you don't have a model that meets the criteria, this does it for you. In order to obtain full understanding and implementation, various in-services will need to be conducted. For many educators, this may be new, and for others, it may be something very different than what they're accustomed to. It does take time. For others, so we're already doing this. This is just a little different template. Train the trainer will be important at some point. Administrators, coaches, lead teachers, all of those folks that are involved in curriculum are going to be trained. And each individual CTE program will be conducted so they know how to meet the standards in Chapter 4 and 339. Again, you don't have to use this model. We're telling you this model works and it meets all the criteria. If you can do it in your own model, so be it. But you need to make sure you meet all the criteria. Okay, that completes the lesson. I'm going to try to get some sample learning guides up here. But Lori, Jeanette, are you on?
Yes.
Do you want to move to questions first? Because we could spend an awful lot of time on the sample learning guide.
Sure. Does anybody have any questions? Please write them in the Q&A.
We've got about 5 minutes here. 6 minutes, I believe. People are so overwhelmed because it's an awful lot of information, but it really isn't difficult. The learning guide template, step by step instructions for the teacher. We have questions through the chat or not?
So mostly I think what we saw in the chat was
okay,
people,
we're just who's their CTDSL and so on. Yeah.
You know, asking how do we get to this? And you know, and I think you answered it later about working with a CTDSL.
They are the frontline resources. They're in the schools now, you know. They've had the same overview. They understand this. Some are experts in it.
So
I will also
he's asking about the binder and if when it'll be available for purchase.
The binder?
Yeah, that's what it's, yeah.
Well, this information is going to be available on the PACTA website and ultimately on PDE's website. I will tell you that if anybody wants samples of these learning guides, we're going to put them on here. If they want to email me direct or text me with your email, I will send you 2 samples. And the samples were prepared by teachers, not following this criteria, but teachers that have been using it for years. So it's so similar. There may be a couple of little nuances in phrases, but other than that, it's identical. So if someone wants something personal, there's my email address, my mobile number, either call, text, send me an email, and I'll send it to you. We're also going to post those samples on the thing. I don't think the binders are going to be for sale. I could be wrong. I know there's a cost in making them, but the binders were a lot more than curriculum. But the curriculum itself, It's really about 20, 22 pages, 18 pages, I believe it is now. And a lot of that's samples. So, you know, I know that the CTDSLs can make copies of that. They can go to school, the school can make copies of that, but it will be available as soon as everything is been gleaned, to make sure that there are no editorial requirements, you know, typos, what have you.
So folks, I just posted something in there. Don't follow it. I was hoping it would go to something that it didn't. So never mind that. Clyde, I do have one copy of one of your learning documents. If you wanted me to share it, I could do that.
Sure, if you would.
I think you have to give me control of the screen. You have to stop presenting then.
Okay.
Clyde, we also have a question. Talk
Yes.
about the unit plans and learning guides, the outline and coding.
Okay, here's the issue. It depends on what the school policy is. Some schools require learning guides in lieu of lesson plans. Others require unit plans. They require lesson plans. The lesson plan is basically telling the teacher how to prepare to teach what they're going to teach. The learning guide is a self-directed tool for the student that they can do without it. I know when the learning guide is complete and it doesn't have to be extensively thick, I've seen substitutes pick it up and teach with it and do very well. So you really need to refer to the school policy, and I would assume some of those policies will change. Some require both, some require either or, some just require lesson plans. So I can't comment about what you're going to be required in the field. That's an individual school policy issue. May not be what you wanted to hear. Okay.
There we go.
There's a good example. Yeah, that got twisted a little bit because of the transition. You know, that zip code belongs over program dental, but in general, you can see there's knowledge, academic, state standards are listed there. And it's pretty simple. It's not as long as you would think it is. It's only, I believe this one's 2 pages long. I've seen them 80 pages long because some people want to put everything in there. There's no reason to copy text and put it in there. Want to scroll down just a little bit more, Jeanette?
Sure. There you go. I think that, well, no, this is a 6-page document. So we'll.
Okay. So that one's 6 pages.
Oh, because there's the second one. Here's an example.
Yeah, there's two examples there.
Distance plumbing and heating.
And these were both prepared by teachers without this template, but a very similar template. And they use it every day with their students. It does not take the place of the student. You know, resources are required. You can't be student-centered unless you give the student full control of being able to progress at their own rate. Meaning, if I don't have the videos, if I don't have the textbooks, the workbooks, if I don't have the tools, I can't do it. I need the teacher to help me. It takes time to get there. This is not an overnight preparation. So you can post these. These are the two that I was talking about. I know one got distorted a little bit in sending, you know, from going from one Word document to another. Sometimes they get twisted a little bit, but in general, it's there. But notice the performance criteria. Needs practice, met standard. My time is up. I'll let you take control, Lori and Jeanette.